Hi everyone, today I am going to introduce you the Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder, which has an acronym called ARFID. I want to start with a quote that might sound familiar to some parents here. One child with ARFID described it in this way. I'm so confused, I'm so hungry, but my brain won't let me eat in case I'm sick. For many parents, hearing something like this from their child can be really heartbreaking. You may see that your child wants to eat or wishes eating could be easier, but something inside them is making food feel scary. On the right, you can see a few responses from other parents. Many parents describe staying up late worrying about their child's eating or watching their child cry and ask why eating feels so hard for them. If any of this sounds familiar, you're definitely not alone. Many families experience the same confusion and worry. And today, what we're going to do is to talk about what ARFID is, why it happens, and what actually helps. So, I'm going to introduce you the definition, mechanism, population, impact, causes, and treatment of ARFID. So, let's start with what is avoidant restrictive food intake disorder is. So we could start by breaking down the acronym ARFID. ARFID stands for Avoidant Restrictive Food Intake Disorder. The words avoidant and restrictive describe what's happening with eating. Avoidant means the persons avoid certain foods, maybe entire food groups, certain textures, certain smells, or foods that feel unsafe to them. Restrictive means the person's eating becomes limited. Either they eat only a very small range of foods or they don't eat enough overall. So, ARFID describes an eating pattern that becomes persistent and limiting. A helpful way to say it in one sentence is ARFID is when avoiding or restricting food turns into a real eating difficulty that starts affecting health or everyday life. We also have a more specific definition of it, which is a persistent eating disturbance that leads to nutritional deficiency, weight problems, dependence on supplements, or significant interference with daily functioning. These may sound vague or complicated, but we will talk more into it in the next slides to clarify it. To help understand ARFID, it is useful to first clarify what ARFID is not, because the term eating disorder often leads people to the wrong assumptions. First, ARFID is not wanting to be thin, and it is not driven by body image concerns. The difficulty with eating comes from other barriers, such as sensory sensitivity, low interest in food, or fear of choking or vomiting. Second, ARFID is not the same as typical picky eating. Many children go through picky phases, and most grow out of them. ARFID is different because the eating difficulty is more persistent and can start to affect nutrition, growth, or daily life. Finally, ARFID is not caused by bad parenting. Parents are often doing their best in a very stressful situation. However, high pressure at meals can sometimes increase anxiety around eating. So we are aiming for strategies that support nutrition without turning meals into battles. Now we are at a really important point. When does eating difficulty become like a disorder like ARFID? So, the eating difficulty has to result in at least one of these four areas. First, weight loss or poor growth. For children especially, eating becomes a concern if they're not gaining weight or growing as expected, or if their weight starts to drop. Those changes are like a body signal that shows intake isn't meeting needs. Second, nutritional deficiencies. Even if the child's weight looks okay, their diet can still be missing important nutrients their body needs for energy, concentration, and healthy development. So ARFID can exist even when the child doesn't look underweight. Third, dependence on supplements. In some cases, a child might need nutritional drinks or supplements to meet their needs. In a very severe situation, Some people may need tube feeding for a period of time under medical supervision. However, these cases are really uncommon and would only apply to extreme cases. And fourth, ARFID can be diagnosed when the eating difficulty significantly interferes with day-to-day life. For example, stress at meals, difficulty eating with others, avoiding social activities, or ongoing conflict in the family around food. Now that we understand what ARFID is and when it becomes a problem, the next important question is, why does it happen? ARFID is usually driven by one or more of the following three main pathways. These are often referred to as the three drivers of ARFID. The first pathway is low interest in eating, the second is sensory sensitivity, and the third is fear of something bad happening. So I will explain these three drivers one by one. Let's start with the first pathway, low interest in food or eating. The main issue here is the child simply doesn't feel strong hunger signals or motivation to eat. Some children rarely say they're hungry. You might notice that they can go a long time without asking for food, or they only realize they're hungry when they're already very tired or irritable. Others get full very quickly. They might take just a few bites and then say they're done, even though they haven't eaten very much. Some kids also forget to eat, especially when they're busy doing something they enjoy, like playing, gaming, or focusing on schoolwork. Eating just isn't something their body reminds them to do. Parents sometimes say their child describes food as boring or says eating feels like a chore rather than something enjoyable. So there can be a few reasons why this happens. For some children, the body's hunger signals aren't just very strong. For others, early feeding difficulties or stomach discomfort may have made eating less appealing. And in some cases, medications that reduce appetite, like certain ADHD medications, can make this pattern more noticeable. Now let's look at the second pathway, sensory sensitivity. In this pathway, certain sensory experiences of food feel overwhelming to the child. When we say sensory, we're talking about things like texture, smell, taste, and how the food looks. For example, some children are very sensitive to texture. Foods that are mushy, mixed together, or have uneven textures can feel very uncomfortable in the mouth. Others are sensitive to smell or appearance. Even small changes in color, brand, or how the food is prepared can make the food feel wrong to them. Sometimes the reaction is very physical. A child might gag, feel nauseous, or have a strong disgust reaction when trying certain foods. Because of this, many children with sensory-based ARFID develop a small group of safe foods that feel predictable. These are often foods that look and feel very consistent, sometimes things like plain crackers, pasta, or other simple foods. This type of eating pattern is also more common in children with sensory processing differences, including some children with autism, but it can also happen in many other children as well. Now we're going to the third pathway, fear-based avoidance. In this pathway, eating becomes difficult because the child is afraid that something bad might happen when they eat. That fear might be about choking, vomiting, getting sick, having stomach pain, or having an allergic reaction. For some children, the fear starts after a real experience, for example, choking on food, having a bad stomach virus, or a painful medical procedure. For others, it can start after seeing or hearing about something scary, like watching someone choke or hearing about an allergic reaction. Once that fear is activated, the body can go into a stress response, like a fight or flight system. The child may feel tense or unable to swallow comfortably. And because those sensations are uncomfortable, the child naturally tries to protect themselves. This is where the avoidance cycles begins, and it's important because it explains why fear-based ARFID can get stronger over time. Here's the simple cycle. It might start with a trigger, like remembering a choking experience or encountering a food that feels risky. That trigger causes anxiety, and the body's alarm system turns on. To reduce that anxiety, the child may avoid the food, eat only the foods that feel safe, or eat less. When the food is avoided, the anxiety drops for the moment, which brings relief. But over time, the brain learns that avoiding the food is what kept them safe. So over time, that can shrink the list of safe foods and make eating feel more and more stressful. That's why a fear-based pattern can start with just one or two foods and then expand. For example, a child may start by avoiding the food they choked on, but later they avoid foods with similar textures, then foods that require more chewing, and eventually many foods start feeling unsafe. So, who can develop ARFID? The short answer is ARFID can affect a wide range of people. It can show up in children, teens, and adults. That said, many people first notice it in childhood, and a lot of clinical services report seeing ARFID commonly in school-aged children and younger adolescents. But we also know that it can persist into adulthood and can be recognized later. It also affects all genders. You also see ARFID more often in people who have certain neurodevelopmental or anxiety-related conditions. For example, ARFID is described as highly comorbid with conditions like anxiety disorders and autism, and it may also co-occur with ADHD. Finally, I want to emphasize this point. ARFID is more common than many people think. So, now we can talk about the impact of ARFID. ARFID can affect the body if a child is consistently eating too little or eating a very narrow range of foods. When the body isn't getting enough energy or nutrients, you may start to see things like low energy, slower growth, or other health concerns. A very limited diet can also mean the body is missing important nutrients, which growing children need for things like bones, energy, and development. In more serious situations, doctors may need to step in to support nutrition. But the important thing is to know that these effects can improve once eating becomes more flexible and nutrition improves. ARFID also has different emotional and social effects. For many families, meals become one of the most stressful parts of the day. Parents may spend a lot of time encouraging eating, preparing special foods, or worrying about whether their child has been eaten enough. Over time, meal times can start to feel tense or exhausting for everyone. Children with ARFID may also feel anxious around food situations. They may avoid school trips, birthday parties, or sleepovers because eating in those settings feel unpredictable or uncomfortable. Some children also notice they eat differently from their peers, which can affect confidence and social relationships. When eating difficulties take up a lot of attention, it can also affect family routines. Parents may feel constant worry about nutrition and growth, and siblings may sometimes feel frustrated or confused about why meals work differently in the household. So, ARFID is not just about food. It can affect daily life, emotions, and family relationships. So now we can look into the causes of ARFID. One important thing to understand is that ARFID usually doesn't have a single cause. It tends to develop from a combination of factors over time. First, biological differences can play a role. Some children naturally have weaker hunger signals, stronger sensory sensitivities, or nervous system that reacts more strongly to anxiety. Personality and temperament also matter. Children who are naturally cautious, sensitive, or prone to worry may find new foods or eating experiences more stressful. Third, experiences around food can shape eating patterns. For example, a choking incident, severe vomiting, or another scary food related experience can teach the brain to associate eating with danger. And finally, other developmental or medical factors can contribute. ARFID is often seen alongside things like anxiety, autism, ADHD, or early feeding difficulties. What's important is that these factors usually work together. For example, a child might already be sensitive to textures, then have a scary choking experience, and those things combine to make eating much harder. So, how is ARFID treated? One helpful way to think about ARFID is that it isn't just one single problem. Different children avoid food for different reasons, and treatment focuses on the reason behind the avoidance. If a child has a low interest in eating, the focus is on helping the body get back into a regular eating rhythm. That often means structured meal and snack times and gradually increasing how much the child eats so hunger cues can become more reliable again. If the main difficulty is sensory sensitivity, treatment focuses on slowly helping the child become more comfortable with different textures, smells, and appearances of food. This happens gradually, step by step, so the child can build tolerance over time. If the main difficulty is fear, such as fear of choking or vomiting, treatment usually involves gently practicing eating in a safe and supported way. Over time, this helps the brain learn that eating is safe again and the fear begins to decrease. Many children actually have a mix of these drivers, so treatment plans are often tailored to address more than one area. One of the main treatments used for ARFID is called CBT-AR, which stands for Cognitive Behavioral Therapy for ARFID. It's a structured therapy that helps children and family understand how avoidance and anxiety around food develop and how we can gradually change those patterns. A big part of CBT-AR is helping the child build more regular eating routines so the body starts to relearn hunger and eating patterns. When a therapy focuses on gradually expanding range of foods the child feels safe to eat, this happens step by step in a supported way, so the child can build confidence instead of feeling overwhelmed. If fear is part of the eating difficulty, like fear of choking or getting sick, the therapy also helps the child slowly face those fears in a safe way, which allows anxiety to decrease over time. For younger children, parents play a very important role. Parents help support the eating structure at home and practice the strategies learned in therapy. So, CPT-AR is really about helping the child and family rebuild a safer, more flexible relationship with food over time. Now, I want to end the treatment session with practical guidance for parents and caregivers. These are actions that support progress across all ARFID pathways. So, parents can help their children by aiming at reducing pressure, keeping meals predictable, avoiding power struggles, and focusing on progress. Let's start with the first strategy, reducing pressure at meals. When children feel pressure to eat, their stress level goes up, and when anxiety increases, appetite usually decreases. So even though the intention is to help them eat more, pressure often has the opposite effect. Instead, the goal is to keep meals calm and predictable. One helpful approach is to offer the food and sit together, but avoid repeatedly reminding the child to eat. You may state the expectation once and then let the meal continue without constant prompting. Using neutral language can also make a big difference. For example, simple phrases like, "This is dinner," or "You can decide how much to eat," communicate structure without creating pressure. On the other hand, things like repeated reminders, counting bites, or negotiating about food can easily turn meals into a power struggle. When every bite is commented on, children often become more tense and less willing to eat. So the main idea here is parents provide the food and the structure, and the child decides how much to eat. That reduces anxiety and helps meals feel safer over time. Another helpful strategy is keeping meals predictable. Children's body actually respond really well to routine. When meals and snacks happen at similar times each day, it helps the body learn when to expect food and when to feel hungry. That structure can reduce stress for both the child and the parent. A common structure we recommend is 3 meals and 2 to 3 snacks per day, spaced out through the day at fairly consistent times. Between those times, it helps to keep things simple, usually water only, and try to avoid grazing on snacks throughout the day. When children are constantly snacking, they often don't feel hungry at meal times, which can make eating even harder. At the table, it can also help to include at least one safe food, something the child is usually comfortable eating. That way, there is always at least one option that feels manageable. And finally, try to keep meals around 20 to 30 minutes. After that time, the meal can end. This keeps meals predictable and prevents them from turning into long, stressful situations. So the goal here is simple: consistent structure, predictable timing, and calm meals. The next strategy is avoiding power struggles in meals. When meals turn into battles, eating usually becomes more stressful for the child, and avoidance often increases. So the goal is to take the pressure and conflict out of the situation. One helpful way to think about this is by separating roles. The parent's role is to decide what food is served, when meals happen, and where eating takes place. In other words, parents provide the structure. The child's role is to decide whether they eat and how much they eat. That parts belong to the child. When these roles stay clear, meals become calmer and more predictable. If a child refuses food, the most helpful response is to stay calm, avoid arguing, and end the meal at the planned time. The routine stays the same at the next meal or snack. Over time, this consistent structure helps reduce stress around eating. The last strategy is focusing on progress rather than perfection. With ARFID, change usually happens in small steps, not all at once. So it's helpful to look for what we call small wins. Progress might look like a child sitting calmly at table, touching or smelling a new food, taking a single bite, or eating slightly more than before. Sometimes progress simply means less fear or stress around food. These steps may seem small, but they're actually very important because they show the child is becoming more comfortable and flexible with eating. It can help to notice and track these small changes over time rather than focusing only on what the child is not eating yet. The overall goal is steady improvement in comfort, variety, and nutrition. We're not aiming for perfect eating right away, just gradual progress. So today's key takeaway is ARFID is real, it's not about body image, it's not about bad parenting, it's treatable and manageable with support. Thank you for listening.